call this talk, if I were going to talk about it. And I thought, a great name for talking about saints would be companions on the journey, like the song we sing. Companions on the journey, along with us. That the saints really are bound to us in Christ, and they are companions with us on the journey. And the problem with it, what's wonderful about it is that there's a lot of images. One of the things is, I don't know if you can see this book, I can pass it around, and so you can see just the cover of the book. And I want to talk a little bit about that sense of the saints being around us, as companions, that sense of the communion of saints, the people with us. When a few years ago, I built a church, and about the same time that Father Gene was building with you this church. Just a little later, in fact, we came out here a couple of times to check out St. James and see how nice the church was, and we went around to other churches. We went to a place called St. Anne's in Barrington, Illinois. And St. Anne's in Barrington, Illinois, they spent $19 million on the church and school, and they had it almost all paid for, because apparently in Barrington, Illinois, people make a lot of money. But what they did, which they didn't have quite enough money to finish this off, but this was a wonderful thing. They had in this church, which was the shape of a big box almost, and it had even a balcony because they were landlocked. And they had hovering over the community these statues hanging over the community, standing there, like St. Anne and St. Joseph and Mary, and they were all standing there. And it was almost like you were standing in the community with these people. They were standing next to you. It was this sense in which you were saying, oh, they really are companions on the journey. Well, here's St. Francis. It's kind of an interesting concept. And then a few years ago, I went out to Los Angeles. Has anybody been to the cathedral in Los Angeles? You been there? Isn't that incredible? The new cathedral. I don't want to tell you how much they paid for that, but they paid a lot. But what they do is then I'll pass this around because I want you to see this, because this is incredible. These are 30-foot high tapestries. And on the tapestries, and that's the cover of this book also, and on these tapestries is all these saints. And they're all facing the light, the same direction as the altar, with everybody else in the community. So you're standing there, and there's St. Peter and St. Francis, and they're all mixed up. They're not standing there chronological. Then you throw John the 23rd in there, and then you throw an anonymous North American, or an anonymous African man, or an anonymous Asian woman, and they're all standing there next to you in the body of the church, and it's 150 feet through 200 feet long, and he's got all of these tapestries hanging there, and they're so incredible. You feel like you're in this crowd. Why? We're in heaven already. You see? That's the sense. We are already in the presence of the Lord, and we are with all those who have gone before us. You get the sense of it? So it's not the sense that you get when you go by somebody's house and they got the ghosts around. You say, we got ghosts, In fact, they did. Did you hear that? I was listening to a survey they just had the other day, and they had a survey in how many people believe in ghosts, and 1/3 of the people that they interviewed that believed in ghosts were Catholic. And I thought, that's interesting. But we do believe that we stand with those who've gone before us. They are with us on this journey of life. They are with us facing the light. Okay? So I want to pass it around. We were just talking before at our table how wonderful this would be because we have this. We could have put this on the projector and projected this. Yeah.
Somebody to help us do PowerPoint presentation.
PowerPoint, because but I want you to look at this. These are all of them. They're so incredible. Just pass it around, and this is just one tap. This is one panel, and this is on Jim Martin's book, My Life with the Saints. But just to kind of get a sense of what, did you see what I'm getting at? It's kind of like we're all on this journey together. And so you have this sense that other people have lived this way. Because the problem with our notion of saints is that these are people who lived long ago. These are people who are disconnected from our lives. These are plastic people. They're not real people. They don't have to put up with the things of life that we do, you know? And then when you start looking at it and you start thinking about this and you say, you've got all these other people standing, there's a young boy and then there's a young girl and then there's an old man and they're not an ordinary saints. They're just, and if you look at the names of them, it just says, well, an anonymous person. Telling us that the saints are more than the people we know. Maybe they're found in the community. In fact, St. Paul begins his letter to the Ephesians with this line, to the saints in Ephesus. To the saints in Ephesus. Wouldn't it be great if we could begin every time we preached here with, to the saints at St. James, to the saints of Sussex, the Sussex Saints. It sounds like a baseball team. but that sense of you get the thing that I'm getting at is that oh yes, we are all called to that same reality. Now, when you think of saints, give me a saint you think of. Give me one saint that you would think of. St. Nicholas. Why St. Nicholas?
Because that's my favorite saint.
Jolly old St. Nicholas. Lean your ear this way. Well, you know, what's wonderful about St. Nicholas is what? What do we learn from St. Nicholas?
I just think about his kind heart and his giving to the children.
Yeah. Generosity, huh? That kindness of heart. So you sit there and you say, oh, there's a quality there. Give me another one. St. Vincent de Paul. Again, what was his main effort?
Service to the poor.
Service to the poor. And really giving a consciousness of the poor. You know, that sense of saying, oh, there's a consciousness and a need to respond to people who are poor. Give me another one. Give me a woman.
Catherine of Siena.
Catherine of Siena. What do we know about Catherine of Siena? Do you know anything? Yeah. Tell me something. Tell me something.
She encouraged the popes to reconcile the Pope problem in the Middle Ages.
What was the Pope problem?
Well, we had one Pope out in Young France and one in Rome.
Yeah, too many popes.
Told them to get it together.
So she had the courage to say, this is not helping the unity of the community. What you are doing is dividing the community. She had the courage to say this. This is a woman who isn't that educated. This is a woman who, though, had the courage of really her profound faith, very strong, Dominican. And she's buried in Rome in a little church called Santa Maria sopra Minerva. And if you've been there, there's a big obelisk of an elephant with an obelisk on top of it, big thing, and right in front of the church, right across from the Pantheon. And you say, oh, I know where that is. Next time you're there, go inside, because that's more fun than the Pantheon. Because that's where they have a room there where she was. And you say, oh man, what a person. What a woman. Give me one more. One more. Just anybody. Doesn't matter.
St. Francis Cabrini.
St. Francis Cabrini. Wonderful, strong woman. What does she end up doing? Building hospitals. Caring for the sick. You see what these people did? They took their lives and they focused on an area of need and they responded. In the early church, when they started talking about the saints, they talked about people who were their neighbors. They talked about people who were the martyrs. Most of the time when they began talking about the saints, they really talked about people who were the martyrs, like Saint Sebastian, Saint Lawrence. In Rome, Lawrence was really popular. In fact, they have a church in Rome, it's St. Lawrence, And it's a very popular, he was apparently killed by being grilled. Not by a lot of questions. They put him on a grill. Remember the line, sister?
I'm done on one side, turn me over on the other.
Yeah, that's supposedly what he said. Now, whether he said that or not, I don't know. But the thing is, it's like this, what these people did is they witnessed to the love of God. A martyr, the word martyr means witness. And it's someone who witnesses, their life becomes a witness to Christ. They do what Christ did. So in the early church, the only people they considered saints were the martyrs. But then later on, they began to say, well, there are other ways of being a witness. You can do all the things we talked about. And then people started thinking about this. And what I like about this book that I just passed around with that picture, Jim Martin's book, James Martin is the in person right now on saints. He writes a lot. He wrote this book. His book is incredibly popular. What's the title of the book? My Life with Saints. It begins with this. He says, I came from a family that wasn't very religious. My parents were good people, but my dad would bring me to CCD classes, and he would sit outside in the car. He wouldn't go to Mass. And he said, my parents would, when I went through Christian religion, and he says, when I went through CF and I got confirmed, he said, my dad said, well, my mom said, well, you probably went to enough classes now, you don't have to go to church anymore. He says, that was my family. But he said, despite all this, when I was about 9 or 10, I saw an article in a magazine about St. Jude, the one who is for hopeless cases. And I saw a statue. And I liked that statue. So I saved up money and I bought the statue and I put it on my dresser. And I'd say this little prayer that came with it, he said. And he said, but then what happened is, he says, well, you know, my friends would come over, and when I was in high school, I was a little embarrassed by all this stuff, so I put it in the sock drawer. So the title of that chapter is The Saint in My Sock Drawer. But that whole sense of what he was saying is that then as he grew up, this guy's a Jesuit. And he starts weaving his life with the saints that were important to him and why they were important. And that's what that book is. Just really kind of stories about different saints. And there's some of them are contemporary, like Mother Teresa and Dorothy Day. And some of them are like St. Peter and Mary, more traditional, you know. But he tells these, and what he's getting at is, these are my saints. Now, we used to do that by naming our children after saints. When my sister was baptized, her name is Marilyn. And the pastor of the parish, you know, pastors are really kind of terrible. You got to be careful of pastors. But the pastor of the parish said, can't name her Marilyn. It's not a saint. I guess he was thinking of Marilyn Monroe, or I don't know. And who knows she's not a saint, right? We don't know. But God's love is really wonderful. Well, her middle name is Margaret, and the pastor said, okay, that's all right then. There is a Saint Margaret. So my sister's name is Marilyn Margaret. And my name is Arthur George, St. George. And so you would have a saint name. Often people had the name of the saint of the day they were born. So they were born on March 17th. Your name was Patricia or Patrick. You were born on March 19th. Your name was Joseph or Joseph. You see, it's the kind of people would do that. And there's something wonderful about that. Because what they're saying is, it's kind of like this. Remember the ad? Remember this ad for TV? It was an ad for, I don't even remember what it was for. It was an ad where the woman was talking about the names of her babies, And then they went and they had this nice car, or they had a blackout or something, and the kid's name was named after the city that the baby was conceived in. And it's kind of like, Detroit or whatever. The sense of naming your child over something, it's like that kind of thing. Now I'm going to take just 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask you to think about, for 2 minutes, to think about a saint that you would say is one of my saints on my journey, and then share that at the table. Okay? Just give you 5 minutes for the whole process. It's like aggressive. Yeah. But this is good. You see what I'm getting at? Okay, how we doing? Pretty much done? Did everybody come up with one? It's interesting how many stories we know about these people, isn't it? It's almost like they are family members. It's when you sit down and you start thinking about it. We were just talking just a little bit, and then you start talking and you say, "Oh my goodness!" You start saying, "Well, at our table we had Saint Therese and Saint Paul and Saint what was it?
St. Anthony.
St. Anthony, because she always loses something." and you do that. How many people are trying to sell a house right now? What do? You take and bury a statue. You see how you can take and make it superstitious, but it's not superstitious. It's talking about this is the key theological thing behind it. And that is this: that when you are baptized into Christ, you are baptized into union with Christ and everyone else who is in union with Christ. And so you are bound together with all who are bound in Christ. And so these truly are our saints. They are truly sisters and brothers to us because they live with us in Christ. You see the point? That's the theology behind it. And we talked about it as the communion of saints. I've experienced this profoundly in my life, and maybe some of you have in different ways. But you'll notice today what we have the litany of saints when we go to baptize. You notice that? I push that. I don't have the short procession up the aisle and then just get on with it. Come on, Father. I got something else going on. No, I add to it. And the reason I do that is not to make it longer. I want people to have a sense of all of these people who have gone before us to the font, praying with us and for us. They're praying with and for us on our journey of faith, especially for those who are just being baptized. When you have an ordination, I don't know if you've ever been to anybody been to an ordination of a priest or a deacon. They used to even do it with subdeacon. In fact, I'll tell you the story when I was a subdeacon. Subdeacon, at the time I was made a subdeacon, is when you made the promise of celibacy. Okay? This is great. So when you're ordained, you have to lay prostrate on the floor. And the whole community sings the litany of the saints. And they're praying along with all these other people before us, right? St. Peter, pray for us. St. Paul, pray for us. St. Francis, pray. They're all going through this, and they're singing it. And I'm laying there, and I'm praying. And I'm praying to the Lord, and I'm saying, Lord, I need every help I can get. I definitely mean what I am doing now. This was right at the time. I got ordained a deacon in 1967. This was when everybody was leaving the church. Everybody who was ordained was leaving. I'm getting in. It was like everybody's coming out of the movie with a ticket, saying, tearing it up. It was a lousy movie, and you're going in. And it's like, what is this? So anyway, I'm laying there and I'm praying, and I say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I never will say I didn't mean what I'm doing now. Okay, I intend to do this. And I'm praying that I felt that like the support of the whole community and the praying community. And I got up and I thought, oh, this is great. Got done with the ceremony. I felt, you know how you feel, you're on top of the world. And so afterward, we go as a community, as a group, a bunch of guys, down to the restaurant to eat, to celebrate. So we're going down the street, and I'm thinking to myself, the Italian girls never looked better. It was just like, what the heck? But it's just an interesting thing how human dynamics are. But what I want to emphasize, not that part of it, that's the part you'll remember. What I want you to remember is the sense of the community praying over everybody. And it's not just the people that were in the church, it's not just the church at that time, it's the church that transcends time. Because our unity with Christ transcends time. And so we are united with all those they are standing with us. They are companions on the journey. And what's so wonderful about them is that there's no one kind of saint. We may think there are, but there aren't. Saints come in all kinds of packages. There are people who are, it's just their personalities are so different. For example, one of the ones you might think about is like Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a monk. He wrote the book Seven-Story Mountain, the story of his conversion and his decision to go. This guy was a monk who couldn't get along with the rest of the monks. Okay? He was always at odds with his abbot. And he finally got his way when they built him a little hermitage out in the woods. Okay? Yet the one thing that really was powerful about the guy is that he was on a trip one day to Louisville, and I told you about this a couple of weeks ago because this young girl in my group I read her letter to you. But he goes to a shopping mall, and he's waiting in the parking lot, and he's starting to look at all these people. This is a guy who's isolated himself. This is a guy who's a hermit. This is a guy who wants to live in the desert kind of mentality, okay? And he's sitting there, and he's in the car, and he's looking at all these people, and all of a sudden he gets this inspiration. And he realizes he loves all these people. And he looks at each of them uniquely, and he says, I see the presence of God in all of these people. Each one is special. And all of a sudden, he has this incredible breakthrough in his life. Isn't that amazing? You say, well, this is that guy's personality. What about Dorothy Day? The exact opposite. She couldn't be more with people. In fact, she had to be with people who were poor and who were struggling, but she was with people all the time. I had that experience once myself. I was in Denver. And I was traveling with some classmates, and we went to visit another one of my classmates who, the reason I remember him, I'm thinking of him, is he now left the priesthood to live in a worker house. And that's where Dorothy Day started, these houses. And what happened is he was living in a parish in Denver in a very poor section of the town, and it was primarily Hispanic. And we were eating supper with him at the kitchen table in the rectory with the pastor. And people stopped in all the time. People were stopping in, walking in. It was almost like you were eating at Grand Central Station. There were people walking in and walking out. And finally, in the middle of this meal, a woman came up and she said to the pastor, I need some counseling. I want to talk with you. He couldn't find any place to sit and be private with this woman. They had to go they went in the next room and they stood in a closet to talk. I thought, what? Well, that's Dorothy Day. That's a Dorothy Day worker house. You know what I mean? In a sense that it's like, it's open for everybody and no one is excluded. And it's not living in a hermitage away from everybody else. It's living right enmeshed with everybody. And it's so enmeshed that nobody is unimportant and everybody's conversation is about, can you imagine that? But look at the different personalities. And you say, we were just talking at our table about Peter and Paul. Talk about different personalities. And talk about Paul. Paul was one of these people. I don't know if you know anything about Paul, but Paul was one of these guys that he was not easy to get along with. Paul had one vision, and it was his vision. You know what I mean? We probably live with somebody like that. That sense, it's like, this is the way it's going to be done, and this is the way it has to be done. All right? This is Paul. Well, Paul in Galatians has this wonderful story. If you look at Acts of the Apostles and you look at Galatians, you have two passages that talk about this whole sense of now proclaiming the gospel to the Gentiles, to people like you and me, people who aren't Jews. Okay? And Paul convinced he convinced the people in Jerusalem, that they were going to change the rule. You didn't have to become a Jew to become a follower of Jesus. You didn't have to keep the dietary law. Otherwise, we'd have to have kosher meals here all the time. And we wouldn't have been able to have that ham sandwich you had. Okay? So you say, that's really, Paul saved us from that. But what he was trying to do was say, we're not going to force the men to be circumcised. We're not going to force the covenant law on these people. We're going to say they can follow Christ and they don't have to do this. Okay? And so everybody agreed with this. So Peter goes in, and this is written up by Paul in Galatians. Peter goes to be with Paul in Galatia, and they're there, and Peter's eating the non-kosher food with the rest of the Gentiles, and it's fine, and everything's fine. And then a contingency of very conservative Christian Jews comes from Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, Peter's keeping the kosher meal. Okay? He's keeping the kosher laws. And Paul says, what's with this? In fact, he says in Galatians, so I said to Peter, what are you doing? How come now, just because they show up, you're following this rule? What happened when you weren't here? What's going on? You see how different personalities? Peter's trying to accommodate the community, and he's concerned about the conservative group. Maybe building unity, not trying to alienate any group. That's not Paul's problem. His problem is, you agreed to do this? How come all of a sudden it's wrong? Didn't we agree together? Isn't that what we said? Paul gets very upset. In fact, if you read Galatians, at the end of Galatians, it has this wonderful little line about those who are trying to force the Jewish law and circumcision on the males in Galatia and all over the world. He says to them, "I hope the knife slips." He had an opinion and he held to it. So you have that. And you have other saints that are really very, very different. I'm going to read just a little quote from Jim Martin's book, Becoming Who You Are, because it is really kind of cool. He says this. He said, in the Jesuit community, there's a small poster hanging in the living room. And it says, Bernardus Vallis, Colos Benedictus Amavet, Opidia Franciscus Magnus Ignatius Urbis. That is, Bernard loved the valleys, Benedict the hills, Francis the small town, Ignatius the great cities. And then he says, each of these four saints found his home in a place suited to his likes and desires, and so was moved to accomplish his own particular task. Their individual desires shaped their vocations. Ignatius Loyola, for example, the founder of the Jesuits, would probably have felt his ambitious plans stymied in a small town. And Francis of Assisi, the apostle of the poor, would certainly have gone crazy trying to run a large religious order from a busy office in Rome. God awakens our vocations primarily through our desires. A man and a woman, for example, come together in love out of desire and to so discover their vocation as a married couple. And then he goes on. And he talks about Merton, and he says, following these individual desires and inclinations led each of the saints to a distinctive type of holiness. As Thomas Aquinas, the great 13th century theologian, said, grace builds on nature. Grace builds on nature. God's grace affects each person within their own personality, their own response. You and I can say each of us then is called by our personality, our own uniqueness. I'm going to read a passage. This is the second reading on All Saints' Day. Pat read the Gospel. This is the second reading. See what love the Father has bestowed on us, that we may be called the children of God. Yet so we are. The reason the world does not know us is it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we shall be has not yet been revealed. We do know that when it is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Every one of us is a child of God. And that means that each of us is called to be a saint with our own personality, our own uniqueness, just like the others. Just like the Dorothy Days and the Thomas Mertons and the Peters and the Pauls and the Francis. And when you think of that, you say, what? Oh, no, not me. But yet, we really are called. And one of the things that Merton used to say is that if we could live to be, and this is what I was hinting at with my homily this morning, a saint is someone who is true to themselves, becoming who you are, becoming your own true self is what a saint is. That's why they're so diverse. That's why they're so unique. And then you say, well, then each of us is called in our uniqueness. And one of the things we have to do is kind of strip away the false self, the kind of self that we would like to project, or perhaps we look at someone else and we envy them and we say we would like to be like that person. You know, remember the ad for the shoes? I want to be like Mike. And if I wear his shoes, I can dunk like Michael Jordan. It didn't work, did it? Because you not only have to say, I want to be like Mike, you say, well, I'm sorry, I'm only 5'7". I'm never going to be like Mike. And white men can't jump. So you say, well, that isn't going to work. So what are you going to do? Then you have to be what you can be. You see? You can say, well, then I have to respond with my personality, with my approach. Jim Martin does a wonderful job in his books talking about this, and he says, he talks about how when he was first in the novitiate, he was with other guys, and he said, there was this one guy who was very quiet, and he would get up very early in the morning, and he would pray every morning. And he thought, gee, he was such a good guy. And he says, that's what I'm going to do. So he'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he started to pray. And he said that lasted about 2 weeks. And it's like, he couldn't do it. He said, gee, you know, that's not me. I just can't do it. And then people start coming up to him and saying, is there something wrong, Jim? You're so quiet. Because he wasn't the quiet person. At the end of that year, the guy he was talking about came up to him and said, gee, Jim, I admire you. You're so outgoing. I'm too quiet. You see the point? It's like each of us has to say, I can't project and say, I've got to be like this person. I've got to be like Francis of Assisi or Dorothy Day. You got to be your own unique person before God and discover your own truth, who you are, and what does it mean to live the gospel at our time and your situation. We were talking before about, the struggles of what's important, and Terry was saying that her favorite saint was Therese. And then she said, well, what's wonderful about St. Therese was this whole thing of the nothing is too small. The little things are important. And we started thinking about that, and then I said, life is made up of little things, isn't it? When you think about it. But it's like, how do we, with our own personalities, live the little things with integrity in life? Live our lives and our situation in integrity. He does a wonderful job, Martin does a wonderful job of talking about a woman who's he says this young woman is concerned about her life, and she's so busy, and she's a mother, and she's working, and her husband's out of town, and she's frustrated by the kids, and she's running here and she's running there. And he says, how does she live? How does she live as a saint in her life? How do you take the witness of other people? What you take from them is not that you become like Francis or like Merton or like Dorothy Day. What it becomes is you say they had integrity and they searched for themselves. They found their true self in responding to the gospel, becoming who they were, living as children of God in their life. That's what we take as the example. That's what we have to follow. And so we have to say, how do I live my life in my situation, given my strengths and my weaknesses, given my abilities and my neuroses? And say, how do I then respond here and now in my life and live it as honestly as I can? You see? Then you say, that's what it means to be a saint. Then that's not somebody plastic, is it? That's not something remote from my life. That's not something I can't do. That's something we're all called to do. That's something we're called to be. It's like live here and now as best we can. And you do that, for example, as couples, you do that by helping each other. I used to tease Daryl when he worked for me at St. Mary's. I used to say to him, of course, you know Daryl already, and his sense of humor is great. So I would say to him, I says, in the old days, they used to talk about your spouse as your source of salvation. Your partner is your source of salvation. And so Daryl listens to this, So at the end of the day, he says, I got to go pick up my salvation. He had to go pick his wife up from school where she was teaching. It's like, that's the point, though. I'll never forget my dad telling me, this is true. My dad, I loved my dad dearly, and we were very close, and it was very difficult to let him go. I was probably closer to my father than I was to anybody ever in my family of origin, closer than I was to my mother. My dad and I just really somehow always linked. But my dad said to me, he said, I am a person of faith because of your mother. Your mother helped me believe. He said, I don't think I would have ever gone to church. I would have ever seen the faith as this important without Mom. And I thought, oh, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that a wonderful thing to say? And I thought, she needs to hear this. She needs to hear that. She needs to hear that you told her that. And I said, did you tell her that? And he said, yeah. They would pray every night before they would go to bed. And it got to be so much a part of their lives, such a rhythm of their life, that when my mom, toward the end of her life, was sick and in the hospital, he was visiting her until about 8:30, and then he drove home. And he got to the house, and he calls her up, and he says, "I can't sleep. We got to pray first." So they prayed over the phone. And I thought, isn't this incredible? This is a pattern of a lifetime. This is a pattern of a lifetime. But you see what I'm getting at? It's like saying it's not something artificial, it's not something removed from life, it's something that's embedded in life as people struggle to live and find who they are. What's so powerful about people like Merton or Dorothy Day or these kind of people is that when you read the story of their lives, you realize they weren't outstanding people without flaws. They were human beings. They struggled with different things. They weren't always honest. They weren't honest with themselves. They weren't always honest with other people. They grappled with problems. Merton, when he was 50-some years old, ended up having an affair with a nurse in the hospital when he went to the hospital. And then when he wrote about it, he said, as he struggled with this whole thing, he's realized that what this did for him was an interesting thing. It gave him a sensitivity to women that he never had before. But it also, he realized, well, he hadn't kept his promises, and he had to keep those promises, and he re-evaluated his whole life. And it was a very interesting thing because he came to grips with his life and his call. You see what I'm getting at? It's like these are not plastic people. These are people like you and me. And these are people who struggled to live and find themselves, find out their true selves, find out who they are. If you become your true self, you will become a saint. I remember when Bishop Dolan came here, one of the things that he said in his opening talk, and I'm a cynic. I'm listening to this new bishop, and you're evaluating him, and you're saying, meh. But his opening line was, I came here to help people become saints. And I thought, oh, great. But the more I think about it, he's right. Isn't that the role? That we become sources of salvation for each other? That we help each other to become true to who we are. Not some facade, not what other people should think of us, but who we are before God. You are God's children now, John says in that passage. Already now you are God's children. What you shall be has not yet been revealed. We do know that when it is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he. It's almost like your childhood grows up into maturity, and then you show the holiness of God in your own unique way, with your own gifts, your own abilities, your own skills, your own struggles. Does that make sense? You see how real it can sound? I hope it doesn't sound plastic or pious to you. Or it's not that. It's really saying, look, the call is to be one with who we are. That God's grace works in our world, works through the circumstances of our life, honing us in to being true human beings. And when we are that kind of human being, we are a saint. Already now. Still struggling with those things that need to be let go of, but still honestly going on. He also, in this little book, Becoming Who You Are, Jim Martin goes into a whole little thing about Henry Nouwen. I don't know if you know anything about Henry Nouwen, but Henry Nouwen, I love his readings, and if you've ever read any of his stuff, he's got a book like Wounded Healer, Open Hands, all kinds of books that he wrote. But the guy was never satisfied with his life. He was always moving from one thing to the next. Until finally, this is a guy who, and I remember this because I was studying in Boston when he was teaching at Yale. And I was studying at a school by the name of Andover Newton. And Andover Newton was an ecumenical school. It was a school that was primarily run by the United Church of Christ and by the American Baptist community. And I had students in my group who were graduates and students at Yale. And one of the students, I was talking to him, and I had to make a presentation, and I used some of Henry Nouwen in this presentation. And he said, he's lecturing at Yale right now. And he is so good. He's a man who never earned a doctorate. All right? He never wrote his doctoral papers in either theology or psychology. But he was teaching, he taught both at Yale and at Harvard. He's teaching at Yale, and his classes were so popular, they had to close the rooms. Because they got so many students in there. They'd hang on his every word. He was that kind of popular, and it was important to him to do that and to be that kind of person. But what he came to discover is that he really found himself when he began to work within the L'Arche community, which is a community with people who were disabled. And he spent the whole last part of his life working with children who were disabled and living in a house, basically a halfway house, with these children, caring for them, and these young adults. That's what he did. Isn't that amazing? He had run away from Yale to go to the Genesee Depot, which was a Trappist place. Then he went down to South America, and he ends up in L'Arche. And that's where he found that this is where I am. This is where I'm at peace. He also taught this wonderful little thing, and it goes back to your point about the little things. He said this. Henry Nouwen was working at Yale, and he was in this dorm, and he was preparing his lectures, and he was, because he was so popular, he worked very hard on his lectures. He wanted them to be perfect. And he would have students coming to him all the time. And it was driving him crazy. And he didn't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, he said this. He said, these people are not letting me do my job. And then all of a sudden he realized his job was to listen to each of these students. So the next time your kids are hanging on you and you say, I can't do what I have to do because my kids are interrupting me all the time. Maybe you have to say, that's who I am. This is who I am here and now. Now, the last thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the Beatitudes. If you look at the Beatitudes, that's what Pat started with, you'll notice that the Beatitudes are very interesting. They start with, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is Matthew's version. There's a Lucan version, which is more stark. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. There are scholars who say that if you look at the Beatitudes, you can see a description of Jesus. The Beatitudes are a description of Jesus. And they are, aren't they? Pouring out your life for righteousness, not worrying about what other people think, giving your life up, being persecuted, being concerned for those who are mourning, being meek and compassionate, being a source of peace, and then you say, oh, that's Jesus. So then you look at that and you say, the quintessential human being, the one who was the truest to himself, the one who became his best true self was Jesus. He was clearly one who was true to himself, became truly human, fully. This is what, you want to know what a human being who rings true looks like? Look at Jesus. Okay? Then you say, oh, so then that's the task of you and me. The task for us is to be like Christ. Listen to this last little thing from Jim. If I can find it. The life of Christ is the central metaphor for the Christian life. In the way that Jesus understood who he was, what he was meant to do, and how he was meant to do it, is a metaphor for the Christian journey to the true self. All of us are called to meditate deeply on our own true selves, to embrace the reality of our vocations, and to let God transform our true selves into sources of new life for others. It's a long route, a lifetime journey, but we are not alone. We have the support of the rest of the community. We have the Holy Spirit inspiring us, who have the love of God the Father, and have the companionship of the truest self of all, Jesus, the Christ. We are not journeying alone. We have companions on the journey to being who we are. You are a child of God. You are to walk always as a child of God. And when the Lord comes, may you go out with all your companion saints to meet the Lord. Does that make sense? That's the call. So the next time you drive, or when you even this afternoon, when you take your babies out for Halloween, kind of think about that's part of becoming a saint, is how we parent, how we love, how we live with each other, not like someone else, but like ourselves. Being as clearly that as we can be. And then we can say, oh, I get it. Then we live like Christ. And when we do, we live the Beatitudes in our world, and our life, and our time. Maybe Dolan was right, huh? We're all called to be saints. Or as Vatican II would say, the call to holiness is for all of us, not some of us. We are all called to live our identity in Christ. That's it. Okay. Any questions or comments? You're all bored. Yeah.
We talked a little bit at our table about the saints, and our explanation to people who are non-Catholic, or why do we pray to the saints? Or evangelicals who say you should just pray to Jesus and God. What's a good way?
Did everybody hear the question? Do we pray to the saints? And if you meet others, people of other faith traditions, they say, well, you're praying to the saints. You should only pray to God. You only worship God. Is that true? Absolutely. So what we're saying with the saints is we're not worshiping them. We are saying exactly what I was saying when I was laying on the floor for ordination. Pray with me and for me that I may live my life with integrity. That's what you're saying to the saints. It's the same thing as you say to your friends, to your spouse, to a neighbor. You say, I'm going to the hospital tomorrow for a procedure. That's what they call it when they're my age. It's a procedure. Everybody else, we used to call it surgery. Now it's procedure. But anyway, you go for this procedure and you say, I'm worried because they're going in there and they're doing this procedure on me, right? And I know somebody, we always know somebody, or I hear of somebody who got killed from this procedure or had a stroke, or, right? They're now crippled for life or whatever, you know? And you say, oh my goodness. You know, I watched PBS the other day, and there was a woman that went in for a heart thing. Did you see that? Did you see this thing on a heart? It was a PBS had special, had things on a heart. And it went this woman, and see, my doctor is telling me I should go in and get a procedure on my heart. So you say, and they did this thing, they did this stint on this woman. They broke a vessel. She had a major heart attack. She's walking around with a machine the size of a suitcase, trying to keep her life alive, and of course it was like horrible. So you're going in for a procedure, and you say to your neighbor, pray for me. You call up the church and you say, pray for me. It's not magic. You're not saying, I'm praying to you. You're saying, we're companions on the journey. We are invested in each other's lives here. Pray for me. Remember me in prayer so that the doctor has a steady hand and so that I may know healing. You see? Isn't that true? Does that make sense to you? That's a great question, Dan. So that's really what we're doing. So it's not it's really, that's why I tried to think about why are we saying this, the title of this thing that I gave. It's companions there are people with us on the journey of life. And this companion marches through time. Marches through time. Just one quick thing, and it occurred to me, and I was going to use this and I forgot. We find people who teach us our faith, and they are saints for us. I remember very clearly thinking, as I worked with a man for 10 months who was dying of cancer. And as I worked with this man over the months, he became thinner, more frail, weaker. He was about 6'4", and he probably only weighed about 120 pounds on the end. He couldn't stand anymore. He couldn't shower, any of this stuff. But I remember coming, and I would come every week. And at the same time, I was directing a play with my youth group. And the play was Godspell. And I remember he would ask me how the kids were doing. And so I would sit there, and the kids would ask me how he was doing. So I would sit on the stage and tell the kids about Jack. And I would sit with Jack and tell him about the kids. And what was so wonderful is that it was really this incredible thing. And so the end, we were ready to put it on, and Jack gives us a donation. This was 1974. He gave us a donation of $500 for this play. And I told the kids this. And they said, well, what, is he going to come? I said, he's too weak, he can't come. So one of the girls says, why don't we bring the play to him? So we brought the play, two skits, 2 songs. We put that skit in his living room. He was in a hospital bed in his living room. We put on the play, 2 skits. We sang 2 songs. And one of the girls, she had this incredible voice, just beautiful. She sat on his bed and she sang, "Oh, bless the Lord, my soul." And she was crying, he was crying. When I buried him, I told the people at the funeral, he taught us how to die. He taught us how to die in faith. They all tell us that St. Joe is the patron saint of those who die, because tradition says he was dying with Jesus and Mary at his side. It can't get much better than that. But for me, the patron saint of dying is a man by the name of Jack. It's amazing, isn't it? How many saints there are around us. Thank you.